The Galactic Military Honor Council convened once every decade to recognize acts of exceptional valor across member species. It was prestigious, sacred even. And this year, for the first time, humanity had been invited to present a candidate. General Krathix of the Zorvian Empire, a four-time recipient of the galaxy's highest military honor, stood at the podium reviewing Earth's submission. His expression, as much as his chitinous features allowed, showed contempt. "This is your candidate." His translator rendered his clicking speech into sharp, dismissive words. A human who disobeyed direct orders, abandoned his assigned position, and acted alone against doctrine. Admiral Patricio Conquo, Earth's representative, stood calmly. "That is correct, General. We submit Gunnery Sergeant James Rivera for the Star of Valor." Krathix slammed a appendage on the desk. "This council honors warriors who follow orders, who embody discipline, who represent the highest ideals of military conduct. Not rogues who act on impulse, perhaps," Patricia said quietly. "You should hear what he did before passing judgment." Krathix gestured dismissively. "Very well. Explain how disobedience merits our highest honor." Patricia pulled up a holographic display. A planet appeared, Kepler 42b, a human colony world, 3 years ago. Kepler 442b came under attack by the Kresh swarm. Standard raid, they hit the capital city, targeting civilian infrastructure. Gunnery Sergeant Rivera was stationed at Firebase Omega 12 kilometers outside the city. His orders were clear: maintain defensive position, protect the firebase, do not abandon post. Sensible orders, Krathix agreed. The firebase had 80 soldiers. The city had 40,000 civilians. Patricia's voice was level. When the Kresh breached the city's eastern district, they trapped 2,000 civilians, mostly children, in a school complex. The building was surrounded. No escape routes. Local military was pinned down and couldn't reach them. She pulled up tactical data. Rivera monitored the communications. Heard the teachers trying to keep the children calm. Heard the civilians calling for help that wasn't coming. And he abandoned his post, Krathix said. "Proving my point. He made a choice," Patricia corrected. He looked at his commanding officer and said, "Sir, those are kids." "I'm going," his CO said. "That's a direct order to stay, Sergeant. You leave, it's insubordination." Rivera said, "Yes, sir. Court-martial me later. Right now, I've got children to save." The council chamber was silent. Rivera took a transport alone into an active combat zone. No backup, no support. Just him, his rifle, and a vehicle. Patricia pulled up helmet cam footage. The council watched as Rivera drove through burning streets under fire, weaving between debris and Kresh warriors. The footage was chaotic, terrifying. He reached the school in 14 minutes. The Kresh had breached the outer walls. Were minutes from reaching the children. Patricia's voice grew intense. Rivera established a defensive position at a choke point, a narrow hallway. Only approach to the room where 2,000 civilians were sheltering. The footage showed Rivera setting up, checking ammunition, loading magazines, and then he held that hallway, alone. For 4 hours and 17 minutes, the council watched in stunned silence as the footage showed Kresh warriors charging, one after another, and Rivera dropping them. Reloading, firing, taking hits, bleeding, still firing. He went through 47 rounds of ammunition, Patricia said. Killed 73 Kresh warriors personally, wounded dozens more. When his rifle overheated and jammed, he used his sidearm. When that ran dry, he used a Kresh weapon he'd picked up from a corpse. When that failed, he used his knife. The footage showed Rivera, covered in blood, his and theirs, still fighting. The Kresh adapted, started using explosives. Rivera took shrapnel to his left side. Collapsed lung. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding. Kept fighting. They tried flanking maneuvers. Rivera repositioned, still blocking the only approach. They brought heavy weapons. Rivera used the bodies of fallen Kresh as cover and kept shooting. Krathix was leaning forward now, mandibles still. At hour 3, Rivera's CO sent an unauthorized rescue team against orders from higher command. They fought their way to his position. Found him barely conscious, having lost nearly 2 liters of blood, still holding the hallway. The footage showed soldiers arriving. One said, "Sergeant, we're here. You can fall back." Rivera's response, "Barely audible, kids. Safe, still in the room. Secure. Then I'm not moving." Patricia paused the footage. Rivera held that position until evacuation transports arrived. All 2,000 civilians extracted safely. 0 casualties among the children. 0 casualties among the teachers. Rivera survived. Barely. Spent 6 months in medical recovery. Lost his left lung permanently. Spleen removed. Nerve damage to his left arm. Doctors said he'd never serve again. She pulled up current footage. Rivera, older now, training young soldiers. His left arm moved stiffly. His breathing was labored. He returned to active duty anyway. currently runs the Close Quarters Combat Training Program at Camp Pendleton, has personally trained 3,000 Marines. Every one of them knows the story of Kepler 442b. Every one of them knows what one Marine with a rifle and a reason can accomplish. Patricia looked at Krathix. You said he disobeyed orders. You're correct. He violated direct commands, abandoned his post, acted against doctrine, and in doing so, he saved 2,000 lives. That's not honor, Krathix said, but his voice lacked conviction. That's emotion overriding duty, is it? Patricia walked closer to the council. Let me tell you about human military honor, General. It's not about following orders blindly. It's about knowing which orders to follow and which orders to break when something more important is at stake. She pulled up Earth's military history. We have a phrase, I was just following orders. It's not a defense. It's an accusation. We learned that lesson at Nuremberg in 1946 when we prosecuted our own soldiers for following immoral orders. Human honor means taking responsibility for your choices. Rivera knew he'd face court-martial, knew his career might end, chose to save children anyway. That's not emotion, that's calculated moral courage. A crystalline council member spoke up. Admiral, I must ask, was Rivera court-martialed? Yes, Patricia said. Full military tribunal. He pled guilty to all charges. Refused to offer a defense. Said only I'd do it again. And the verdict? Patricia smiled. The presiding judge reviewed the evidence, looked at Rivera, and said, Gunnery Sergeant, this court finds you guilty of disobeying direct orders, abandoning your post, and unauthorized use of military equipment. It also finds that you embody everything we want in a Marine. Charges dismissed. You're recommended for the Medal of Honor instead. The entire courtroom, prosecution, defense, witnesses stood and applauded. Rivera was the only one who didn't understand why. Krathix was silent for a long moment. You're saying human honor includes the right to disobey. We're saying human honor includes the responsibility to choose. Orders are important. Chain of command is critical. But they're not absolute. When following orders means abandoning your moral foundation, human honor demands you make a choice and accept the consequences. Patricia pulled up more examples. My Lai Massacre, Vietnam War 1968. American soldiers received orders to kill civilians. Some obeyed and were later prosecuted for war crimes. But Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson landed his helicopter between American soldiers and Vietnamese civilians, threatened to shoot his own countrymen if they didn't stop the killing, saved dozens of lives, disobeyed orders to do it. Thompson was initially condemned, called a traitor. Decades later, he received the Soldier's Medal, our highest award for non-combat heroism, because we recognized that his disobedience represented true honor. Another example appeared. Lieutenant William Calley led the My Lai Massacre. He was following orders. We convicted him anyway. Because I was following orders is not sufficient defense for atrocity. Human military honor, Patricia said firmly, is built on a paradox. We demand discipline and obedience, but we also demand moral courage and independent judgment. We expect our soldiers to follow orders, but we also expect them to refuse immoral orders. We train them to be warriors, but we also train them to be human beings who take responsibility for their actions. She looked at Rivera's image frozen on screen, blood-soaked. Still fighting, James Rivera made a choice, accepted the consequences, saved 2,000 lives. That's human honor! Krathix stood slowly. Admiral Okonkwo, I owe you an apology. I judge by my species standards, but I see now that human honor is different. More complex? Not more complex, Patricia said, just different. Your honor emphasizes obedience, hierarchy, tradition. Ours emphasizes individual moral responsibility, even when it conflicts with orders. Neither is superior. They're just different approaches to the same question, what makes a warrior honorable? Krathix nodded slowly. In my species, Rivera would have been executed for disobedience. But he saved 2,000 lives. How do we reconcile this? The understanding that honor isn't universal, Patricia said. What looks like disobedience to you looks like moral courage to us. What looks like chaos to you looks like individual empowerment to us. She gestured to the council. That's why this council exists, to recognize that different species define honor differently, and sometimes to expand our own understanding of what honor can mean. The vote was called. The council debated for 3 hours. The concept of honorable disobedience was foreign to most species, troubling to some, but the footage of Rivera holding that hallway, bleeding, still fighting, still protecting, that transcended culture. The vote was close, but it passed. Gunnery Sergeant James Rivera became the first human to receive the Star of Valor, the galaxy's highest military honor. When Rivera arrived at the ceremony, wearing his dress uniform with his medals, Purple Heart, Silver Star, Navy Cross, and now the Star of Valor. He walked stiffly, his damaged lung making each breath visible. Krathix personally presented the award. Gunnery Sergeant Rivera, I must ask, when you disobeyed orders, did you know you were risking everything? Rivera's answer was simple. Yes, sir, but those were kids. My career isn't worth 2,000 children's lives. Seemed like basic math to me. Would you do it again? And a heartbeat. Sir, every time. Krathix placed the medal around Rivera's neck, then did something unprecedented. He saluted. A human gesture. Rivera returned it sharply. I understand human honor now, Krathix said quietly. It terrifies me, but I respect it. Why does it terrify you, sir? Because an army of soldiers trained to make moral judgments independently is unpredictable, difficult to command, potentially chaotic. Krathix's mandibles clicked softly, but also incredibly effective, because each soldier is empowered to do the right thing, even when the right thing contradicts orders. Rivera smiled. That's the idea. Sir, we're not robots. We're Marines. We think. We choose. We take responsibility. And if you choose wrong, then we face the consequences. Court-martial. Prison. Dishonor. We accept that risk. Rivera touched his new medal, but we also accept the responsibility to act when action is needed, even if it means breaking rules. Later, at the reception, a young Vexorian officer approached Rivera. Sergeant, I must ask, how do you train soldiers to know when to obey and when to disobey? Rivera considered the question. You don't train them to disobey. You train them to think, to understand why orders exist, to comprehend the mission's purpose, not just the mission's details. And when orders conflict with conscience, then they make a choice, and live with it. Rivera looked at his medals. Every medal I wear represents a choice. Some choices were following orders. Some were breaking them. But they were all my choices. That's what human honor is, owning your decisions and their consequences. The Vexorian officer looked troubled. That's a heavy burden. Yes, Rivera agreed. What it is, that's why not everyone can carry it. That's why military service is hard. We're asking people to be warriors and philosophers and moral actors all at once. And you think that makes better soldiers? Rivera smiled. I think it makes better humans. And better humans make better soldiers. Across the galaxy, military academies began teaching the Rivera doctrine, the principle that honor sometimes requires disobedience, but disobedience must be principled, not capricious. Some species rejected it outright. Too chaotic, too individualistic, too human. But others saw its value, saw that empowered soldiers who could make moral judgments might be more effective than obedient soldiers who couldn't. The debate continues. But on Kepler 442b, in a memorial park, there stands a statue. A lone Marine, holding a hallway surrounded by creche bodies protecting an unseen room of children. The plaque reads simply, Gunnery Sergeant James Rivera, who knew which orders to break and which children to save. And every year, 2,000 families gather there, because honor, they learned, isn't always about following orders. Sometimes it's about breaking them, for the right reasons, and accepting the consequences. That's the human way, complicated, dangerous, effective, and undeniably honorable.